Ethan's white moonlight divorced after being cheated on. Without hesitation, he broke up with me and posted it on his social media. I wished I could go back 8 years and change the fate of Emma, who had married that scumbag. She was the one he had always longed for. Later, both of us were transported back 8 years in time. He altered Emma's fate to prevent her from marrying the scumbag, while I changed my fate of being with him. When I saw Ethan's social media post, I had just finished an 8-hour surgery. On my way back to the office, I collapsed in the hallway from exhaustion. When I woke up, I was in a dim, unfamiliar private room, surrounded by colorful, flashing lights and blaring music. Someone patted my shoulder and teased, "Claire, your drinking tolerance is terrible. Just one drink and you're out." My blurred vision slowly focused, and I realized it was Emma in front of me. She wore a short, wine-red dress and had her slightly curled long hair cascading down. I stared at her radiant and captivating face, remaining silent for a few seconds before stumbling into the bathroom. Looking at the mirror, I saw a fair and delicate face staring back at me. I splashed cold water on my forehead repeatedly, unable to deny the reality. The scars were gone. I had traveled back to 8 years ago, the year I had just started college. Today was my roommate Emma's birthday. I had accidentally drunk a high-proof drink and passed out on the couch for a long time. Groggily emerging from the bathroom, I bumped into someone. Before I could apologize, a familiar, deep voice said near my ear, "Sorry, are you okay?" My fingers instinctively tightened around my phone. I looked up to see the man before me. He was tall and well-built, with sharp, deep features. He wore a loose, plain black t-shirt. It was Ethan. Our gazes met and lingered for a few seconds. I ignored the ambiguous look in his eyes, lowered mine, and calmly replied, "I'm fine," before brushing past him and returning to the couch. I had just taken a sip of bottled water when Ethan entered the room. Emma greeted him with a bright smile, clinging to his arm as she introduced him to us. "This is my brother." The vibrant lights continued to swirl as he stood with one hand in his pocket, glancing down at us with a faint nod. If not for the brief encounter in the hallway earlier, this would have been our first meeting in this lifetime. Ethan was Emma's biological brother. He was also the man I had loved and been with for 6 years. It wasn't until Emma's wedding day that I realized the one he loved wasn't me. He had gotten recklessly drunk that night, and while holding me in his arms, he murmured tenderly, "Emma, Emma." That moment, I felt completely hollow, frozen in place. It took me a while to process what was happening. The person he loved was Emma, but that was when I loved him the most. So I pretended nothing had happened, stayed with him, and kept believing his claim that she's just my sister. Years later, when Emma divorced after being cheated on, I overheard her crying in Ethan's arms, saying, "Ethan, I never loved him. I've always loved you. Do you still want me?" He explained that their mother had a heart condition and had threatened to end her life if they were together, forcing him to feign affection for someone else and pair me with him. I didn't know if that was true, but Ethan believed her. That same night, he approached me and, after a long silence, said hoarsely, "Claire, let's break up." I looked at his handsome face and didn't even manage to ask the obvious, why, before being called away for an emergency surgery. Suppressing my emotions with logic and composure, I spent 8 hours in the operating room. When I came out, the first thing I saw was Ethan's social media post. I wish I could go back 8 years to change Emma's fate of marrying that scumbag. Now that I've returned to that time, I finally noticed the details I had previously ignored, or perhaps deliberately overlooked. Like the birthday cake Ethan had personally made for Emma, the way he gently coaxed the wine bottle out of her hands, or how he unhesitatingly carried her on his back when the party ended and she drunkenly insisted on being carried. The other 2 roommates marveled at how good her brother was to her. And back then, I naively believed he was just her brother. That's why, later, when Emma found someone she liked and started pairing Ethan with me, Ethan's kindness and attentiveness had indeed moved me. But when the truth was revealed, I realized that his gentleness had never been directed at me. Whether it was a birthday or an anniversary, he always seemed disinterested. Yet, whenever Emma was around, his attention was entirely on her. From beginning to end, Ethan only loved Emma. Like now, as I was sitting in the back seat of Ethan's car, sharing the space with my roommate, who was passed out drunk. Ethan glanced sideways at Emma, asleep in the front passenger seat. A strand of her long hair fluttered in the evening breeze. In the dim light, I silently observed as Ethan reached out his right hand toward Emma and softly murmured, "Emma, this time, I won't let you marry him." My heart pounded violently at that moment. I closed my eyes, plunging into darkness. But the realization was clear. Ethan had also traveled back in time. He wouldn't let Emma marry anyone else, and I wouldn't stay with him again. Back at the dormitory, lying on a bed that felt both familiar and foreign, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily, blowing waves of warm air. My head throbbed slightly as I drifted into a fitful sleep. In my dreams, I seemed trapped in an endless loop, reliving the 8 years from meeting Ethan to breaking up with him. Over and over again, I heard him say, "Claire, let's break up." What finally pulled me from the nightmare was the vibration of my phone. I opened my eyes, dazed for a few seconds, then grabbed my phone and glanced at my schedule. Suddenly, I remembered. I had a part-time job tutoring a high school student in English. Glancing at the time, I quickly got out of bed, freshened up, grabbed a random bag of bread, and headed out. Thankfully, my subject was English, and because my work required me to read cutting-edge medical research, I hadn't let my English skills slip. I skimmed through the teaching materials beforehand to refresh my memory. The student was a high school girl. After finishing the prepared lesson, I began checking her English composition assigned by her school teacher. The topic was a simple one: me in 10 years. Resting her chin on her hand, she asked me, "Miss Claire, do you think I could become a comic artist in 10 years?" I replied confidently, "Yes, you can. You won't even need 10 years. In 8 years, you'll have a massive fan base and be a very popular artist." She tilted her head and asked, "Then will Miss Claire become a doctor too?" "Yes," I said. Just then, her eyes lit up, and she pointed excitedly toward the window. "Look, Miss Claire, that must be Mr. Ryan. He'll definitely become a physics researcher." Through the rain-splattered glass, I looked up and met the gaze of a tall figure walking under a black umbrella. My heart clenched tightly, and a flood of memories surfaced. He wouldn't live to see 10 years later. 2 years from now, he would die in a car accident. His name was Ryan Monroe, a prize student of the infamous Demon Professor in our neighboring university's physics department. He was often the center of conversations among girls, frequently appearing on confession walls across universities. Known for his unparalleled looks and talent, the only perceived flaw was his humble beginnings. My interactions with him were minimal. I had seen him a few times in our school library. The most vivid memory, however, was during my junior year when I went to the hospital to visit Ethan, who was sick. On my way back to campus, crossing a zebra line with other pedestrians, a speeding car ran a red light, charging toward us. Amid the chaos and screams, a black Mercedes appeared out of nowhere, intercepting the car. The tires screeched violently as both vehicles collided with the distant guardrail. Instinctively, I ran toward the scene. Halfway there, a sudden explosion erupted. Flames engulfed my view, and for a moment, everything was silent. The cicadas on the nearby trees paused, only to resume their deafening cries moments later. No one survived inside the cars. A shard of glass grazed my forehead, leaving a scar. The incident made national headlines. The results revealed that one of the bodies belonged to the car's driver, a man who had lost everything to gambling and wanted revenge on society. The other was Ryan. He had borrowed his professor's car to retrieve some documents from another university and happened to be on that road on his way back. The internet was flooded with his information. Pictures of him, along with stories of his talents and accomplishments, spread rapidly. Many mourned his death, praising his beauty and brilliance. Some even said he died heroically, saving others. After all, he was alone in this world. His parents had both passed away during his senior year of high school. Later, I visited his grave with flowers and encountered his professor there. A chubby, elderly man stood in silence before the tombstone. Only when a drizzle began did he sigh deeply and say, "That boy had such a promising future." For a long time afterward, I suffered from insomnia. My heart felt like it was submerged in water, heavy and achingly sore. I thought it was guilt and regret for him. A gentle tug on my wrist pulled me from my thoughts. I snapped back to reality, noticing that Ryan's figure had already disappeared from outside the window. My student's voice pulled me back completely, saying, "Miss Claire, I'm heading to Mr. Ryan's physics class now. Don't forget what I just said. Okay, don't be late tomorrow night." Honestly, I hadn't paid attention to what the student said earlier, but the distant memories from my previous life reminded me. Tomorrow was Ryan's birthday. Back then, his parents had been too busy to spend time with him, so he had asked me to keep him company. The rain outside had stopped at some point, and a warm ray of sunlight peeked through the clouds. I suddenly recalled the details I'd learned about Ryan online after his death. Tomorrow was indeed his birthday, but the truth was, Ryan never celebrated his birthday. He was born on a day marked by tragedy. His firefighter father had died in a fire during a rescue mission on the same day. He didn't even get to see his son once. I thought, perhaps Ryan wouldn't want to hear happy birthday, but it was the day he came into this world, and he shouldn't have to face it alone. The next day, I arrived at my student's house ahead of the agreed time, carrying a cake and a gift. Ryan was teaching a lesson. Outside the window, the sun was setting. He was wearing a simple white shirt, holding a test paper while standing at the wooden desk. He lowered his head slightly to review the material, his demeanor elegant and composed. Seeing him like this, I couldn't help but think of a rumor I'd come across in the past, a vague and unverifiable screenshot of a conversation. It was brief, just a few lines of text. Someone asked, "Ryan, do you have someone you like?" He replied, "Yes." "Then why not tell them?" The reply came 3 minutes later. Forget it. Most people didn't believe someone like Ryan, with his exceptional looks and talent, could ever harbor a quiet, unspoken crush. By then, of course, he was already gone. The truth would never be known. If he did have a crush, it was destined to remain buried forever. Whether it was the father he'd never met, his mother who fell ill and passed away, the secret love he never confessed, or the bright future cut short, Ryan's life was full of regrets. A genius like him, from our university's physics department, deserved a better ending. When the lesson ended, the sky outside had darkened completely. My student eagerly grabbed the art supplies I had bought for her, hugging them tightly. If only Mr. Ryan didn't have other plans, we could have had all three of us together. She sighed. I paused for a moment, then looked at Ryan, who was tidying up and preparing to leave. On impulse, I said, "Mr. Ryan, why don't you stay?" Before I could elaborate, the power suddenly went out, plunging the room into pitch-black darkness. I coughed lightly and lied. "We girls are afraid of the dark. Why don't you stay a bit longer?" The room fell silent for a moment. Then, with a small click, a flame ignited. Ryan had lit a lighter, shielding the small flame with his hand. The flickering light accentuated the sharp contours of his face, making his features even more defined. He looked at me and said simply, "All right." Using the lighter, I lit the candles on the cake and placed it in front of them. "Today, we're celebrating the continuation of life," I said seriously, looking at them. "May the rest of your lives be safe and happy." Setting aside my guilt toward Ryan, no one wished more than I did for him to have a peaceful and happy life from now on. The dim room filled with the sweet scent of the cake. Together, we shared it. My student, biting her spoon, ran into the study and returned with her report card, saying excitedly, "Miss Claire, my mom said I improved so much on this exam. She wants to treat you both to dinner to thank you." Looking at the report card, I remembered this happening in my previous life. But back then, Emma had asked me to help her move props for a photo shoot, so I politely declined the dinner invitation. As my thoughts wandered, I glanced at Ryan, sitting quietly in the soft light. Suddenly, I realized something. On that dinner day in my previous life, I was supposed to meet Ryan properly, but I never made it to dinner. On my way, I had saved a child from being hit by a car and ended up in the hospital with a leg injury, unable to attend. To prove I wasn't just flaking on them, I took a photo and sent it to the girl's parents. The picture showed exactly where I was, along with a brief explanation to assure them I wasn't being unreliable. While waiting for the doctor to apply ointment, I casually scrolled through social media and stumbled upon Emma's latest post. It was a series of photos from her photography club's activities. And of course, Ethan was in the frame. As always, he showed up whenever Emma called. I remembered our 4th anniversary vividly. That day, Emma had a fight with her boyfriend, went to a bar, got drunk, and called Ethan, crying, "Ethan, I'm so upset. Can you come keep me company?" That time, Ethan and I had just arrived at a nice restaurant for dinner. We hadn't even ordered when he stood up, ready to leave. I offered to go with him, but he stopped me, saying, "Emma's always been proud. She wouldn't want you to see her like this." I asked, "What about you? Would she want you to see her like that?" "It's different. We grew up together," he replied. Not long after, Emma made up with her boyfriend. At a party, I overheard her jokingly telling him, "You're not the only one who likes me. If you make me angry again, I'll leave you." Ethan, who was nearby, silently drank his wine and said nothing. Deep down, Ethan must have always known. Emma was fully aware of his feelings but pretended not to notice, continuing to enjoy his unwavering devotion while staying with the man she truly loved. As for me, Ethan's simple explanation, "She's my sister, and she's your friend," was enough to silence any protest I might have had. Thankfully, in this new life, I wouldn't let myself become their convenient third wheel again. After getting my wound bandaged, I hobbled out of the hospital. Halfway down the street, it began to rain. The wound couldn't get wet, so I gritted my teeth against the pain and found a sheltered spot to call for a ride. Unfortunately, my phone had run out of battery. The late summer wind carried a slight chill as I resigned myself to waiting for the rain to stop. Just then, Ryan appeared. He came through the rain, holding an umbrella. Without a word, he removed his jacket, tied it around my injured leg, handed me the umbrella, and picked me up in his arms. "The road here is too narrow for a car. Let's find a better spot," he said, leaning against his chest. I could smell a faint mix of bitterness and freshness. His steady heartbeat filled my ears as my gaze drifted from his Adam's apple to his profile. When we finally got into a car, I asked, "Why are you here?" He explained matter-of-factly, "Your student's mother was worried about you. She asked me to check on you since I had a meeting nearby. When I couldn't reach you, I started looking for you." The rain made the car interior feel damp and warm. I cracked the window slightly, wondering just how many places he had searched. Fatigue crept in, and I fell asleep. When I woke up, the rain had stopped, and we were at the campus gate. Ryan carefully helped me out of the car and carried me to the dormitory. Before leaving, I thanked him. He looked down at me with a faint smile and said, "No need to thank me, Miss Claire." Back in my dorm, I noticed that Ryan's jacket was still tied around my injured leg. Few days later, when I went to return it, fall had already arrived. Because of the rain and my need to rest, I hadn't left campus much. It was a sunny weekend when I finally went to find him. I realized I'd been impulsive. I didn't even have his contact information. Searching for him felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. I didn't find Ryan, but I did unexpectedly run into Ethan. I was passing by the basketball court when I heard someone shout, "Call an ambulance." He passed out. My instincts as a doctor kicked in, and I ran over. Pushing through the crowd, a boy was unconscious on the ground. I immediately knelt down, performed CPR, and after about 15 minutes, he regained consciousness. The paramedics arrived shortly after, and as I stood up to leave, I noticed Ethan watching me from across the crowd. He was wearing a red and black jersey, his expression calm, his gaze steady. I picked up Ryan's jacket and turned to leave. Behind me, I heard a boy ask Ethan, "Do you know her?" "No," Ethan replied. I found a nearby cafe to rest and regain my strength. The occasional chime of the wind chime on the door was soothing as I idly played a game on my phone. The bell rang again, and I looked up. Ryan was standing in front of me. At that exact moment, the sound of my game signaling game over played on my phone. I looked at Ryan in surprise and smiled. "What a coincidence to meet you here." The next second, he raised an eyebrow and said, "Not a coincidence. I came to find you." Seeing my puzzled expression, he opened his phone and placed it in front of me. The screen displayed a post on the university's confession page. The image was of me performing CPR on the basketball court, with a caption that read, Within 3 minutes. I want all the information about this woman. The post had been up for less than half an hour, but it already had hundreds of comments. Most people were just there for the excitement, but a few were making thoughtful observations. She seems to know professional first aid techniques, probably from the medical school nearby. Why is she on our campus? The jacket she's holding looks like a men's coat. Could it belong to her boyfriend? Is he from our university? I didn't continue reading, feeling slightly embarrassed. I picked up the jacket beside me and handed it to Ryan. I've washed it already, I said. That night, when I returned to the dorm, my ever-curious roommate immediately shoved her phone in my face. Look at this, she exclaimed. On the confession page was a new post. Case solved. She's Ryan's girlfriend from the physics department. The attached photo was of me handing the jacket back to Ryan at the cafe, with a pink filter that made the interaction look far more intimate than it actually was. As my roommate's gossiping spirit burned bright, I quickly explained the situation to her. After listening to the entire story, she sighed with disappointment but then added, "Well, this has potential. I'll ship it for now." I chuckled helplessly and glanced at Ryan's contact in my phone. His username was simply Ryan, and his profile picture was a plain white origami crane. After some thought, I renamed him as Mr. Ryan in my contacts. His social media was clean and sparse, with only one post. The wind is picking up. The timestamp matched the day we first met. For some reason, I was reminded of another timeline. On the 6th anniversary of Ryan's death, I visited his grave with a bouquet of flowers. The rain had just stopped, and the setting sun painted the sky in hues of gold and orange. My shadow fell on his tombstone as I silently gazed at his photo, the same composed and gentle face. Suddenly, a breeze swept by, lifting the strands of hair that had fallen over my face. The leaves rustled in the wind, sounding like the opening chapter of a new story. Then, time reversed, and I was brought back to this moment, where we met again. I felt fortunate to have returned before meeting Ethan. Instead of wasting this second chance on revenge, I decided to let us become strangers. Strangers. Just like that day on the basketball court when he said he didn't know me. Freshman year was chaotic and hurried, and it ended abruptly. If my memory served me right, among the incoming freshmen at Ryan's university, there would soon be someone Emma would fall for. He was Ethan's direct junior. In the previous timeline, they met at a party organized by Ethan, and Emma quickly developed feelings for him. From there, she started pairing me with Ethan. Through her deliberate matchmaking and manufactured coincidences, Ethan eventually asked me to be with him. Now that Ethan had also returned to the past, he would likely prevent Emma from meeting that boy, ensuring he could be with her. That seemed like the inevitable conclusion, but fate often has a way of surprising us. During the last professional exam before the break, I was seated diagonally behind Ryan. I had just finished my paper and was about to hand it in when I noticed him suddenly wake from a nap. He stood up abruptly, grabbed his exam paper, glanced at it, and then looked around the room. Grabbing the arm of the confused student next to him, he asked, "What year is it now? Tell me, what year is this?" I silently watched his back as I walked up to submit my paper and left the room. Outside the exam hall, Ethan was waiting. As I passed him, he called out to me. I stopped and looked at him questioningly. He asked, "Are you with him now?" I didn't know what he meant by that question, so I simply replied, "What does it have to do with you?" After that, because of the break, I didn't see Ethan or Ryan for quite some time. I thought that starting over, Ethan and Emma would finally find their way to happiness together. But I was wrong. Even in this new timeline, Emma didn't choose Ethan. She still fell for Ethan's junior, just as she had in the previous timeline. Her words to Ethan after her divorce, asterisk, "You were the one I loved all along," asterisk, were nothing more than a lie. What surprised me was, this time, Emma didn't try to pair me with Ethan. Instead, she focused on pairing Ethan with the woman who, in the future, would be the reason her husband cheated on her. I had no idea what happened during the break, but when we met again, Emma and that woman had already become friends. The night air was chilly as I hugged my books and walked back to the dorm. From a distance, I saw Ethan and Emma talking downstairs. Without pausing, I passed by them, Their conversation drifted into my ears as I walked away. Emma, I'll say it again. He's no good. You're too naive. If you don't stay away from him, you'll end up being hurt. Emma's coy voice responded. Ethan, trust me. You don't understand him. He's really a great guy. Just try being with him for a while. Okay. Please. 2 months later, Emma officially announced her new relationship. That day, I attended a party, only to encounter a drunken Ethan in the hallway outside the private room. On my way back from the restroom, he suddenly pulled me into his arms. The overpowering smell of alcohol engulfed me. I struggled, but the more I resisted, the tighter his grip became. His low, hoarse voice murmured in my ear. Emma, why are you with him? He'll hurt you in the future. You must have been forced into this. I know you like me. I know the one you love is me. When my struggles failed, I raised my leg, ready to kick his shin. But just as I was about to, the hand pressing against my back abruptly let go. The next moment, Ethan was forcefully yanked away. His wrist seized, and he was thrown to the ground. I nearly fell due to the sudden release, but a strong arm caught me around my waist, steadying me. It was Ryan. He happened to be here for his group celebratory dinner and had come outside for some air, accidentally stumbling upon this scene. Ethan, clearly sobering up after the impact, leaned against the wall, his expression a mix of embarrassment and anger. He sneered at me. Claire, every word you say is a waste of time. Ignoring him, I grabbed Ryan's arm and was about to leave when Ethan's voice rang out again, laced with sarcasm. Aren't you proud of yourself, Claire? I know you've always liked me. Seeing that I didn't end up with Emma must make you happy, right? But even if you're with him now, so what? He's just a dead man walking. He's going to die anyway. Ethan's words made it clear that he was confusing events and emotions from both timelines. His instability driving him to lash out recklessly. I didn't care what he said about me, but he had no right to talk about Ryan like that. I stopped in my tracks and turned back to face Ethan, who was still looking at us with disdain. Word by word, I told him, shut up, Ethan. He's not going to die. Because I'm here now. I'm going to change his fate. Even though I couldn't go back to the moment when his father sacrificed himself to save others, or the time before his mother's illness took her life, I had returned to this moment. I could save him now. As we stepped out of the hotel, the sound of car horns echoed in the distance. Only then did I realize I was still holding Ryan's hand. His palm felt warm and slightly damp. I paused for a moment before quickly letting go and hiding my hand behind my back, clenching it into a fist to conceal my embarrassment. Sorry. And, thank you, I said, trying to compose myself. Ryan's hand, which had been resting at his side, clenched into a loose fist. Looking down slightly, he asked what he said earlier. My heart skipped a beat, and I interrupted him hastily. He was drunk and spouting nonsense. Don't believe a word of it. Ryan, you'll have a bright future ahead of you. You still have so much time left. We stood in silence for a few moments before Ryan suddenly smiled, his demeanor relaxing. And you? You'll definitely become an excellent doctor in the future. Right. I smiled back at him, bright and determined. As long as I'm alive, I'll do everything I can to save lives. Emma didn't succeed in pairing Ethan with that woman, but the woman still developed feelings for Ethan and began to cling to him. In a way, Emma's goal was achieved because that woman wouldn't have the chance to ruin her future marriage now. What Emma didn't anticipate was that Ethan had also traveled back in time. He stubbornly clung to the words she had once said to him in the past, a lie that had become like an oxygen mask for him, allowing him to sustain his misguided love. But it was Emma herself who would ultimately shatter that illusion. At a party I didn't attend, as my roommates later described with complicated expressions, Emma got drunk and slapped that woman. No one could hold her back as she screamed, "You shameless homewrecker." Her boyfriend tried to stop her, but the more he did, the more erratic Emma became. What struck me as odd was how Ethan, her brother, remained calm throughout the ordeal. He stood to the side, silently watching as Emma spiraled out of control in her drunken tantrum. I was momentarily surprised, opening my mouth as if to say something, but in the end, I stayed silent. Ethan's calm wasn't indifference. It was resignation. He had realized the truth. He knew Emma had also traveled back in time. Not only had she chosen not to be with him, but she had even used him as a pawn to block someone else. To Emma, Ethan was nothing more than a tool. Ethan, in his own eyes, had become a joke. After that, I didn't see him seeking out Emma as frequently, but Emma didn't seem to care. I encountered Ethan a few times while visiting Ryan at his university. The most vivid memory was when Ryan and I went to a newly opened restaurant just outside campus. On our way, we passed by an outdoor barbecue stand where a fight had broken out. Ethan was in the middle of it. The scene quickly descended into chaos, with shouts, screams, and the sound of shattering glass filling the air. A broken beer bottle flew toward me, sharp fragments glinting in the dim light. Ryan reacted swiftly, pulling me into his arms. The glass grazed his cheek, leaving a thin, bloodied line. Startled, I gasped, "Ryan!" He quickly led me into a dumpling shop across the street and reassured me, "It's okay. Don't be scared." By the time the police arrived, the commotion had inexplicably died down. Using bottled water, I gently cleaned Ryan's wound, then dug a green cartoon bandage out of my pocket. Carefully, I prepared to apply it. The door burst open, and Ethan walked in with a few others from the fight. They all bore varying degrees of injury. Ethan's lip was still smeared with dried blood, faint evidence that it had been hastily wiped away. While his friends loudly cursed the other party from the fight, I continued calmly applying the bandage to Ryan. Suddenly, Ethan kicked the table with a resounding thud, silencing the group. The next day, while walking through campus in light snow, Ethan stopped me. His face was bruised, and his gaze carried a mix of emotions. "Claire," he began, "it won't work out between you two. Take my advice. Don't fall for him." My expression turned cold. Without pausing, I threw back, "I'm not a psychiatrist. Don't come to me." As I walked away, his voice followed, carrying an air of nonchalance but also bitterness. "Claire, the person you're supposed to love is me." Reflecting on it now, my life had been smooth and uneventful, except for the detour of meeting Ethan and Emma, which wasted 6 years of my life. Ryan, however, was someone I owed a life to. When I first traveled back in time, I thought my purpose was to change my fate of being with Ethan, but as time passed, I realized that wasn't the case. One afternoon near the end of sophomore year, I woke abruptly from a nightmare. In it, I returned to that fateful intersection, crossing the road with the crowd. A speeding car hurtled toward us, and I watched helplessly as the black Mercedes intercepted it, followed by the deafening explosion. The old ceiling fan above me whirred, blowing strands of my hair into disarray as I stared blankly at the ceiling. I had always known this was an unsolvable problem. Beyond the driver's motivation for revenge against society, I had no other information about him. I could save Ryan. I could avoid going to that intersection. But what about the elderly man, the child, the pregnant woman, and the students who would be there instead? Once, in my desperation, I went to the police with a 1 in 10,000 chance they could help. Their response was curt. "Mississippi, have you been watching too many sci-fi movies? Our investigations are based on science, not mysticism." By early June, the college entrance exams were underway, marking the end of both Ryan's and my tutoring jobs. By then, I had known him for nearly 2 years. Yet, he never mentioned any special girl, and I could almost confirm that the screenshot of the so-called secret crush was fake. I had often wondered about the type of girl Ryan might like. Perhaps she'd be beautiful, or intelligent, or as extraordinary as he was. But whatever she was like, she would undoubtedly be someone special. That night, the students' parents invited us to dinner again to express their gratitude. By the time we finished, it was already dark. Ryan and I walked together down a moonlit alley. Perhaps it was because we knew this was where our paths would part. Or maybe it was just the melancholic nature of the night that brought out hidden thoughts. As we passed under a dim street lamp, I broke the silence, pretending to ask casually, "Ryan, do you have someone you like?" He stayed silent for a long moment before answering with another question. "Why do you ask?" I replied, "If you ever have someone you like, make sure to tell them. Don't keep it to yourself and let them remain unaware. If you say it out loud, you might have a chance." As petals drifted in the breeze, we paused at the intersection. Ryan suddenly turned to me and said sincerely, "Claire, thank you," thinking he was thanking me for the advice. I didn't dwell on it and continued living my days as usual. Then came the day before Ryan's sacrifice in the previous timeline. His professor had asked him to drive the next day to pick up some documents. When I learned about it, I asked if he could go in the afternoon instead. I told him a friend had given me 2 movie tickets and asked him to go with me in the morning. He agreed. The movie I chose was random, coincidentally about time travel. It told the story of a woman who went back in time to mend the regrets of a man she loved, only to realize that their shared love was just a dream. But I didn't see how it ended. Halfway through, I turned to Ryan, who was intently watching the film, and told him I needed to use the restroom. Calmly, I left the theater as if it were any other day. Outside, I got into the car I'd rented and drove to the intersection. On the way there, it hit me. Our meeting had always been a prelude to parting. "Ryan," I thought, "this time, it's your turn to see the future." When I arrived at the intersection, I saw the familiar crowd waiting to cross the street. I waited for the car to appear. Suddenly, an explosion rang out nearby, making my heart jolt violently. My mind went blank for a moment, and I quickly got out of the car, calling Ryan as I ran toward the burning wreckage. The phone kept ringing, but no one answered. I stood before the flames and debris, my vision blurred by tears. A wave of dizziness swept over me, and the last thing I remembered was that I still hadn't been able to save him. When I woke up, I was in a hospital room. The air was filled with the familiar scent of disinfectant. Beside my bed were my phone and a white lab coat. A nurse I recognized explained that I had fainted and been asleep for 20 minutes. She told me it was 6 years later. I stared at the curtain swaying gently in the breeze, momentarily unable to tell if I dreamed of the past or if this was reality. It wasn't until I went to the restroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at my reflection, seeing that the scar on my forehead was gone, that I knew for certain I had truly traveled back. My hands trembling, I picked up my phone and quickly searched for news about the accident. All I found was a short, obscure record in an old article. There was no headline, no trending topic, no mention of Ryan, his name, his story, his gravestone. Everything was gone. I asked countless people if they remembered the accident from 6 years ago, the one that had saved so many lives and had once been a hot topic online. The responses were always the same. "Claire, are you sure you're not misremembering? There was an accident, but it didn't make the news." I don't know. 6 years ago was too long ago. Ryan had no family left. His former classmates had scattered across the country. I went to his university to find his professor, only to learn he had moved abroad. There was no trace of Ryan, no evidence he had ever existed. The only thing that confirmed our connection was the last message in his chat history with me, sent the day before the accident. It was his reply agreeing to see the movie. For 6 years after his death, there was only emptiness. I typed into the chat box but never hit send. I was afraid it would become a message that would never receive a reply. As long as I didn't send it, I could believe he was still alive. I developed a habit of taking walks around his university whenever I had free time, often ending up by the lake we used to visit. His old lab was nearby, on the first floor. Through the clear glass windows, I seemed to see a slender figure in a white lab coat at the lab bench, bent over and focused, jotting down numbers on a piece of paper. But in the next second, the image disappeared. Ethan came to find me the day after I returned to the past. He said, "Let's not break up. It was just a moment of impulsiveness. Please, give me another chance." Faced with his humble and pleading demeanor, I paused my pen, mid-sentence in my patient notes, and calmly looked up at him. "Ethan, were we ever together?" The color drained from his face in an instant. The truth was, he had no evidence to prove that we had ever been together. After traveling back in time, it wasn't just the news of Ryan's sacrifice that disappeared. My 6-year relationship with Ethan was erased as well. Fate had brought all 4 of us back to 8 years ago. Ethan wanted to change Emma's fate of marrying a scumbag and be with her, so he personally altered the course of our relationship. While he eventually realized that he was just being used as a tool, the result remained. There was no longer any connection between him and me. Afterward, Ethan became desperate, searching for any shred of evidence to prove we had once been together. But his efforts were in vain. On his phone, there were no photos of us, no chat history. None of our mutual friends recognized each other anymore. Surveillance footage from places we used to frequent didn't show me. As time passed, my coworkers, who initially gossiped about the handsome man pursuing me, eventually sighed. What a shame. He must have some mental issues. I smiled and gently suggested to Ethan when he appeared yet again. Go left out the door to the psychiatry department. You should get checked out. Since I adamantly refused to acknowledge our past relationship, the only person who knew about it was Emma. After traveling back, she was once again cheated on. Even though Ethan had prevented the future affair between her and the woman who would ruin her marriage. A person destined to cheat will always find a way. During the time Ethan was entangled with me, both Emma and that woman were clinging to him as well. Emma tried desperately to appeal to Ethan, telling him how much she loved him, how helpless she had been. Initially, Ethan remained indifferent, then grew increasingly impatient. One day, after Ethan refused to meet her, Emma came to me and caused a scene. I silently watched her tantrum, then calmly called security to escort her out. Go left out the door to the psychiatry department. I told her. You should get checked out too. My coworkers sighed again. They really are from the same family. Both seem to have a few screws loose. After some peace, I encountered Ethan and Emma again a month later. I was at the lab to pick up some documents from a colleague when I saw Ethan furiously throwing papers at 3 people across the room. I didn't pay it much attention and turned to leave. Later, I learned from my coworker what had happened. Ethan had overheard a heated argument between Emma and her mother, during which her mother revealed that they had a blood relationship. A DNA test confirmed it. Ethan and Emma were half-siblings, sharing the same father. Their birth dates were only 3 months apart, meaning Ethan's father had cheated while his mother was pregnant. The lie Emma once told Ethan, about their mother threatening to end her life if they were together, had come full circle and turned out to be true. By mid-May, I was invited to give a lecture on first aid at a university. The auditorium was packed, and the lecture ended successfully. As I packed up my materials, I noticed a familiar silhouette in the dispersing crowd. But before I could get a clear look, the figure disappeared. The sky had darkened, and a light rain began to fall as I reached the auditorium doors. After a moment's hesitation, I used my folder to shield my head and prepared to dash into the rain. Suddenly, a black umbrella appeared over me. A familiar, faintly bitter yet comforting scent reached me as water droplets slid off the slanted edge of the umbrella. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, my hand still holding the folder above my head, and slowly turned around. There he was, Ryan, whom I hadn't seen in 6 years. He looked just as he had back then, his face calm and cold, his sharp features illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights. After the explosion, Ryan had been taken abroad by his professor for medical treatment. He had been in a coma for nearly 2 years. After waking up, he stayed overseas for continued recovery and pursued his studies, eventually joining a research institute. Now, he had returned to teach as a professor in the physics department at this university. He summarized those 6 years in just a few simple sentences. I blinked. Countless words I wanted to say condensing into just 2. That's great. He was alive. It was great to know that Ryan, once Mr. Ryan to me, now Professor Ryan, was still here. What hadn't changed was his popularity among women. It was said that his lectures were always so packed that some students had to stand to listen. Out of curiosity, I thought about sneaking into one of his lectures during my free time. Unfortunately, on the day I chose, his class had been switched with another professor's. I didn't know until it was too late. Sitting in an interior corner by the window, I realized trying to leave would only draw attention to myself, as standing up would disrupt a large section of the students around me. I hesitated for half the lecture before texting Ryan. I wanted to attend your class, but it seems I entered the wrong one. What should I do now? Just as I sent the message, the professor unexpectedly called on me to answer a question. I stared at the geology problem on the board, clueless. Taking a deep breath, I was about to apologize and admit I'd walked into the wrong class when a soft beep behind me gave me the answer. Without thinking, I repeated it and got it right. As I sat back down, my phone vibrated. Ryan hadn't responded yet. Thinking about the help from the student behind me, I turned to thank them, only to meet a familiar face. Ryan was sitting casually, dressed in a black hoodie with the hood slightly pulled over his head. His bangs hung low, covering part of his eyebrows. For a brief moment, I felt as though I was seeing the Ryan from 8 years ago. Quickly, I turned back around, pretending I hadn't noticed. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a new message. I noticed you walked into this classroom. I was curious what kind of class could interest a doctor so much that she'd attend it herself. Above his text was the one I had sent him earlier. Before I could respond, another message came in. So it turns out this is actually my lecture. I couldn't help but smile. Over the 6 years we've been apart, Ryan's personality seemed to have changed slightly. He still carried that cool and distant demeanor, but now he seemed a bit less restrained. From then on, my relationship with Ryan returned to what it had been 6 years ago, though with an inexplicable new dynamic. First, I couldn't put my finger on what was different. That was until one day, when I went to visit him at the university and overheard a conversation. One of his colleagues, seemingly frustrated by love, sighed and asked him, "Professor Ryan, how do I make her realize I like her?" Then, after a pause, they added, but you wouldn't understand the pain of unrequited love. You don't have that kind of trouble, do you?" Ryan didn't respond. The colleague pressed further. "Tell me, have you rejected so many people because you already like someone?" Holding my breath, I heard him reply softly with a single word, "Yes." I didn't interrupt. Silently, I turned and left. 6 years is long enough for many things to change. I had to admit, I liked Ryan. I couldn't pinpoint when the feeling shifted from wanting to make up for what he'd lost to romantic affection. But at that time, knowing there would be no outcome, I chose to suppress it. For a long time afterward, I used work and overtime as excuses to keep my interactions with him limited, maintaining a polite but distant relationship. That lasted until Ryan began showing up in my consultation room 3 days in a row. Finally, I couldn't hold back a small sigh of exasperation. "Ryan, you don't need to come every day." He was persistent, responding seriously. I registered and queued up. "I mean, you don't need to keep coming for something so minor." He was silent for a moment, then lowered his voice, as though holding something back. "Actually, I'm not coming for the medical issues." Before he could finish, a large, aggressive man suddenly stormed into the room. I immediately recognized him as the man who had recently caused his wife's death by domestic violence. After enduring years of abuse, she had overdosed on medication and, despite the hospital's best efforts, had died during treatment. He had always believed that doctors were responsible for his wife's death. And now, in his rage, he pointed a knife at me, shouting venomously, "It's your fault my wife died." In the ensuing chaos, the man was subdued, but not before Ryan stepped in to protect me and got slashed across his shoulder. The wound required 10 stitches. I stood by his hospital bed, staring at his pale face. A sharp ache rose in my chest, and my voice came out hoarse, trembling slightly. "I'm sorry." Whether it was in the past or now, Ryan always seemed to get hurt because of me. After he spent 2 weeks in the hospital, I drove him home. On the way, I gently suggested, "Should I hire a housekeeper for you? It might help avoid misunderstandings." He was typing on his phone with one hand but paused mid-message, raising his head to ask, "What misunderstandings?" The car fell silent. A soft breeze blew in through the slightly open window, ruffling the hair on his forehead, and ripples spread through the calm lake of my heart. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, choosing not to answer. In the end, he refused to let a stranger into his home to take care of him, so I took on the responsibility. Not that Ryan needed much help. Each morning before work, I'd prepare lunch for him and have breakfast with him before heading out. In the evenings, we'd eat dinner together. Over time, a strange feeling began to creep into my heart. One evening, I couldn't decline an invitation to a coworker's birthday party. Beforehand, I called Ryan to let him know I'd be home late. On the way back, my car broke down, and a male coworker who lived nearby offered me a ride to my building. As soon as I opened the door, a strong, sour smell hit me. At the dining table, Ryan was poking at his food with a calm expression. What are you eating? I asked. He looked up, his tone nonchalant. Can't you tell? I'm eating vinegar. I walked over to the table and glanced down at his plate. He had ordered dumplings, and the small dish in front of him was filled to the brim with vinegar. Shaking my head, I boiled some noodles for him, opened a window to air out the room, and gently reminded him, don't eat like that again. The smell of vinegar is overwhelming. He lowered his gaze and silently ate the noodles, not saying a word. The next day, one of Ryan's colleagues came to visit him, a coworker who had once asked him if he had someone he liked. Seeing this person stirred up emotions I had tried to bury. Ryan had someone he liked. I didn't know what the colleague said to him, but his mood seemed to shift subtly afterward. I felt a pang of frustration at myself for paying too much attention to him. That evening, over dinner, I told him, your wound is healing nicely. It should be fully recovered soon. He glanced at me, nodded, and softly said, After we ate, I quietly went to the bathroom to prepare a warm bath for him, reminding him not to let the water touch his stitches. But as I was leaving, I slipped, and before I could fall, he caught me and pulled me into his arms. The rapid thudding of our hearts filled the steamy room, and for a moment, I couldn't tell whose heartbeat was louder. When I tried to steady myself and pull away, his arms tightened around my waist, holding me firmly in place. The mist in the bathroom swirled around us, and every point of contact between us felt like it was igniting with heat. He looked down at me, his expression different from usual. His eyes held a turbulent intensity, and his voice was deep and raspy. Claire, he said, I need to admit something. What is it? I whispered. He hesitated for a second before continuing. I have feelings for you. My mind was a chaotic mess. My rationality burned to ashes by the heat in the air. Instinctively, I blurted out, but you already said you like someone. Before I could finish, he leaned closer, turning me toward the bathroom mirror. With one hand, he wrote a single word in the fogged glass. Yes. Not long after we started dating, I finally asked a question that had been buried in my heart for a long time. Why didn't you contact me during the 6 years you were abroad? He was sitting on the couch, reading a physics journal. And my question, he pulled me into his arms. The faint, bitter scent that was uniquely his enveloped me as his deep voice answered. I was scared. Before I could say anything, he continued, holding me tighter. I was afraid of becoming disabled, of not being good enough for you, afraid that if I reached out, I'd want more. And most of all, I was afraid you'd already fallen for someone else. His words stirred a bittersweet ache in my chest, and the corners of my eyes burned with unshed tears. I hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with emotion, and said, Ryan, you're amazing. To have made it through so much and still stand here in front of me. There was a moment of silence before his hand moved down along my waist. He chuckled softly, his voice low and teasing. Dr. Claire, I can be even more amazing. Want to see for yourself? The tender atmosphere shattered instantly. Later, Ryan seemed determined to prove his point, repeatedly and thoroughly demonstrating his capabilities. He would even pause halfway and ask me, Am I amazing? I never answered, and he never stopped asking. The first time Ryan took me to visit his parents was 6 months into our relationship. Standing before the gravestone, I was taken aback to see the face of the woman etched into it. She was beautiful and graceful, though the illness that had ravaged her had left her unrecognizable in the end. She passed away while I was by her side. Ryan said quietly. I realized then that my mother had been her attending physician. During my senior year of high school, whenever I visited my mom at the hospital, I often saw a kind woman in one of the rooms. If my mom wasn't in her office, I would wait in that woman's room, and over time, I grew close to her. I would cut fruit for her, fold paper cranes, and chat with her. But just before my final exams, she passed away. It was my first experience confronting a major illness and death. I think that's when I started to understand why my parents, as doctors, could never find time to spend with me. That's also why I ended up choosing a field I once hated, medicine. Back then, I naively thought cancer was the only disease that couldn't be cured. But after studying medicine, I learned that very few illnesses can be completely defeated. I never expected that she was Ryan's mother. On the way back, I leaned against the car window, watching the blur of passing greenery, and said softly, "Ryan, I met your mother a long time ago." His response was calm. "I know." My heart stirred slightly. Had he seen me back then? I saw Ethan again 6 months later. One evening as I was about to leave work, Ryan had sent me a message saying he'd arrive in 10 minutes. After changing clothes, I got into the elevator and ran into Ethan. He looked pale and gaunt, his frame visibly thinner. We were alone in the elevator, and the silence was heavy. When the doors opened on the ground floor, I walked out without hesitation. But just as I stepped forward, Ethan grabbed my arm. "Claire," he said quietly, his gaze downcast. "Can we talk?" Frowning, I shook off his grip and replied coldly, "Ethan, stop wasting both our time." He seemed to have anticipated my response. With a self-deprecating smile, he said, "You probably won't believe me, but on another path of fate, we were together for 6 years. I didn't bother to respond, turning and walking away. Behind me, his voice dropped even lower. "I'm sorry I wasn't good to you. That's why I lost you." My steps faltered briefly but quickly regained their pace. Outside the hospital, Ryan was waiting for me by the flower beds. The warm hues of the setting sun cast a golden glow over him. For some reason, I thought back to when the students' parents invited us to dinner for the second time. I had arrived early to thank them for their concern when I was injured. The parent had looked puzzled and said, "I never asked Ryan to check on you. I only casually mentioned why you weren't there." Later, Ryan had said he needed to leave for something at school. So that's how it was. My thoughts were interrupted when Ryan took my hand, gently brushing back a strand of my hair that had been tousled by the evening breeze. He tucked it behind my ear. I looped my arm around his and leaned slightly against him, a sense of warmth spreading through my chest. Smiling, I said, "Ryan." The wind's picking up. Ryan's perspective. Epilogue. The online rumors weren't wrong. I am alone in this world. If my death meant saving countless families, then so be it. But truthfully, I'm not as noble as people think. Self-preservation is human nature. However, if someone I cared about was involved, I wouldn't hesitate. I would willingly trade my life for her survival. After the explosion, when I regained consciousness, I found myself trapped in a cemetery. In the beginning, every year on the anniversary of my death, the people I saved and a few netizens would come to visit. What I heard most often were words of gratitude and praise, saying my death had been meaningful. Later, only Claire came. She rarely spoke. Most of the time, she would place flowers in front of my gravestone, clean up the surrounding area, and then sit quietly for a while. The first words I heard her say were on the 4th anniversary of my death. By then, no one else came to visit. In the misty rain, she stood before my gravestone. Her head bowed as she looked at my photograph. Her voice carried a solemn promise. "Ryan, don't worry. I won't forget you." It was the first time she called me by my name. I never thought meeting her would be tied to my death, but if I had to do it all over again, I would make the same choice. So, when I unexpectedly returned to 8 years ago, 6 years after my death, I made peace with my decision once more. I knew she had also traveled back in time. I understood that her closeness to me was born out of guilt and a desire to make amends. But that was enough. It was better than never having known her at all, wasn't it? The years I spent alone had been unbearably long, while the 2 years I knew her made time feel fleeting for the first time. If I couldn't be her lover, then being someone she would never forget for the rest of her life wasn't such a bad alternative. I don't actually remember what the perpetrator looked like, nor do I recall his license plate number, but I do remember that before reaching the intersection, he had thrown several beer cans out of his car window, drinking as he drove. That would be the only clue I had to stop him before Claire arrived. When I saw him toss another beer can out of his car window, I honked my horn as I caught up to him. Unexpectedly, seemed to provoke him, and he suddenly swerved toward a nearby plaza. As I accelerated and blocked his path, a fleeting thought crossed my mind. Of that movie I never finished. I would probably never know how it ended. That spring, I took time off from school to visit my mother in the hospital. The room was quiet, and she was still asleep. I moved to the other side of the room to sit and read when I noticed a plate of neatly sliced fruit on the bedside table. Next to it was a pure white paper crane. Before I could think much of it, my mother woke up. Her gentle smile brightened the room as she said, "Claire folded this for me.